The words hit me like ice water down my spine. Maya, sweetie, when are you going to move out of that adorable little shoebox? Aunt Lorraine's voice carried across the restaurant table, dripping with the kind of false concern that felt more like a public execution. I mean, don't get me wrong, studio apartments have their charm, but at 32? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. She let the sentence hang in the air like expensive perfume, cloying and impossible to ignore. Around our family dinner table at Chez Laurent, Lorraine's choice, naturally, everyone's conversations seemed to pause. My mother, Clara, shifted uncomfortably in her seat, shooting me an apologetic look that somehow made everything worse. "It suits my needs perfectly fine," I said quietly, cutting another piece of my salmon with surgical precision. The truth was, my studio apartment was small by choice, not circumstance. Every dollar saved on unnecessary square footage had gone somewhere far more profitable. "Oh, I'm sure it does," Lorraine laughed, the sound like champagne bubbles popping. "But Maya, darling, at some point you have to think bigger. Look at my penthouse. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, that divine terrace overlooking the park. Living space is an investment in yourself, in your future." She gestured dramatically, her diamond bracelet catching the restaurant's soft lighting. Everything about Aunt Lorraine caught light. Her platinum hair, her silk blouse, her perfectly manicured nails. She was the kind of woman who commanded attention simply by existing in a space, and she knew it. "Lorraine," my mother said gently, "Maya's doing just fine. She's got a good job. She's responsible." Responsible, yes, but where's the ambition, the drive? "Maya, you work in accounting, is it?" "Financial analysis," I corrected, though she'd forget again by next month. Right. Well, that's lovely, but when I was your age, I was already building my boutique empire, taking risks, making moves." She leant forward conspiratorially, including the whole table in her wisdom. "You can't live small and expect big things to happen to you." My Uncle David, Lorraine's long-suffering husband, cleared his throat. "Actually, Maya just got promoted to senior analyst. That's quite an achievement." Lorraine patted his hand like he was a child who had said something cute but irrelevant. "Of course it is, darling, but I'm talking about real wealth building, property ownership, investment. Maya, have you even looked at condos? I know a fabulous realtor who could show you some entry-level places. Nothing too ambitious, mind you, just a starter home to get your feet wet." Entry-level, starter home. The condescension was thick, I could taste it. "I appreciate the concern, Aunt Lorraine, but I'm happy where I am." "Happy?" She repeated the word like it was foreign. "Sweetie, happiness is a luxury you earn by making smart financial decisions. You're 32 and renting a studio apartment. Where's your equity building, your portfolio growth, your investment in your future?" If only she knew. My phone buzzed discreetly. A notification from my property management app. Rent collected on all 6 of my rental units right on schedule. I slipped the phone back into my purse without checking the amount, but I knew it by heart. Enough to cover Lorraine's mortgage payment on that penthouse she was so proud of. "Maybe," she continued, signaling the waiter for another bottle of wine, "you should consider moving in with someone. Split costs. I know it might feel like going backward, but sometimes we have to be practical about our limitations." Limitations. That word hung in the air between us like a gauntlet thrown down. Around the table, my family's discomfort was palpable. My cousin Jake studied his menu like it held the secrets of the universe. My mother fidgeted with her napkin. Even Uncle David looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. But Lorraine? Lorraine was in her element, holding court and dispensing wisdom to her poor, misguided niece who just couldn't figure out how to live up to her potential. "Actually," I said quietly, setting down my fork, "I'm doing just fine financially, but thank you for the concern." "Oh, I know you're managing, darling, but managing and thriving are 2 very different things. Look at me and David. We took risks, made investments, built something real. That's how you create generational wealth. Generational wealth. I nearly choked on my wine. If only she knew that the building her precious boutique was in, the one she rented at market rate, was owned by one of my shell companies.
The evening dragged on for another hour, with Lorraine regaling us with stories of her latest designer purchases, her upcoming trip to Milan, her plans to expand her boutique to a second location. Every story was a subtle reminder of how much more successful, how much more ambitious, how much more worthy of admiration she was than her small-minded niece. When we finally said our goodbyes on the restaurant's front steps, Lorraine pulled me aside. "Maya, sweetie, I hope you didn't take anything I said the wrong way. I just want to see you succeed. You have so much potential, but you're thinking too small. Dream bigger, darling. Life's too short to live in a shoebox." She kissed my cheek, leaving behind the faint scent of her signature perfume, and clicked away on her designer heels toward the valet stand, where David was waiting with their car. I stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, watching her go. In the distance, I could see the lights of downtown, including the building where my modest studio apartment sat on the 15th floor. Modest, maybe, but it was mine, free and clear, and it was just one small piece of an empire she couldn't even imagine. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from Ethan Park, my property manager and the only person who knew the full extent of my real estate portfolio. 3 new applications for the Meridian Street property. Want me to start screening? I smiled for the first time all evening and typed back, "Not yet. I might have something specific in mind for that one." 3 months later, the first signs of trouble appeared in the society pages. I was sitting in my favorite corner booth at Miller's Deli, laptop open, reviewing quarterly reports over my usual Tuesday morning coffee, when I saw the headline, "Local boutique owner's business partner under investigation for financial irregularities." My coffee went cold as I read the article twice, then a third time. Jared Willis, the Lorraine charming business partner and the man she'd been gushing about at family dinners for the past year, was being investigated by the state attorney general's office for allegedly siphoning funds from multiple business ventures. The article was careful to use words like alleged and under investigation, but the picture it painted was damning. Jared had convinced several small business owners, mostly women, the article noted, to invest heavily in expansion projects, then systematically drained their accounts through a complex web of shell companies and fraudulent contracts. Kensington Boutique, owned by local socialite Lorraine Kensington, is among the businesses affected, the article continued. Sources close to the investigation suggest that hundreds of thousands of dollars may be missing from the boutique's accounts. I closed my laptop and leaned back against the booth's worn vinyl. Part of me felt a sharp stab of satisfaction. Karma, finally coming for someone who'd made a career of looking down on others. But a smaller, quieter part of me felt something else. Something that might have been sympathy. My phone rang again. Mom. "Maya, honey, have you seen the news about your aunt?" "Just reading it now. She called me this morning in tears. Apparently, this Jared character emptied their business accounts, took everything, the boutique's payroll, their expansion fund, even the money they'd set aside for inventory. She's devastated." I could hear the worry in my mother's voice. Clara had always been the peacemaker in our family, the one who smoothed over conflicts and looked for the good in everyone, even when that everyone was her dramatic, self-absorbed sister. "How bad is it?" "Bad, Maya. Really bad. She might lose everything. The boutique, the penthouse, everything. David's trying to help, but his practice hasn't been doing well lately either." I walked home from the deli slowly, my mind churning. For years, I'd watched Lorraine float through life on a cloud of privilege and condescension, never seeming to face any real consequences for her behavior. And now, suddenly, her entire world was crumbling. That evening, I did something I rarely allowed myself to do. I went down the rabbit hole of social media stalking. Lorraine's Instagram, which usually featured daily posts of her perfectly curated life, had gone silent 3 days ago. Her last post was a photo of her and Jared at some charity gala, both of them smiling brilliantly for the camera. The comments below were brutal. "I hope you get your money back. So sorry this happened to you. Can't believe people still fall for these scams."
But it was the private message requests that really told the story. Dozens of them, from employees, creditors, and customers, all asking the same questions. When would they be paid? What was going to happen to the boutique? Was it true that paychecks had bounced? I closed the app and stared out my studio apartment's single large window at the city lights below. Somewhere out there, in her overpriced penthouse, Aunt Lorraine was probably having the worst night of her privileged life. My phone buzzed with a text from Ethan. "Saw the news. Interesting timing considering she just insulted your living situation publicly. Universe has a sense of humor." I'd mentioned the restaurant incident to Ethan in passing a few weeks ago, not because I was particularly upset by it, but because he'd asked why I seemed distracted during one of our property reviews. Ethan had been my friend since college, and he was one of the few people who knew about my real estate investments. He was also the only person who understood why I kept my wealth private. "Too easy," I typed back. "Almost feels unfair." "Since when do you care about fair? She made her bed." He had a point. Lorraine had spent years making it clear that she thought I was small, unambitious, settling for less than I deserved. She'd never missed an opportunity to offer unsolicited advice about my life choices, my career, my living situation, all while never bothering to actually get to know me well enough to realize that her assumptions were completely wrong. But still, watching someone's life implode, even someone who'd been consistently condescending to me, didn't feel as satisfying as I'd expected it to. 2 days later, the other shoe dropped. The eviction notice made the front page of the local business section. "Boutique owner faces eviction as financial scandal deepens," read the headline, accompanied by a photo of Lorraine looking uncharacteristically disheveled outside her penthouse building, clearly trying to avoid the photographer's camera. According to the article, Jared Willis had disappeared entirely, leaving behind a trail of empty accounts and forged documents. The boutique's landlord was pursuing eviction for 3 months of unpaid rent. The building management company for Lorraine's penthouse had filed similar proceedings. Within a week, everything unraveled completely. I heard about it first from my mother, who called me at work sounding more worried than I'd heard her in years. "Maya, I need to ask you a favor." I knew what was coming before she said it. "It's about Lorraine. She's lost everything. The boutique's closed, she's being evicted from the penthouse, and David filed for divorce yesterday. He said he can't handle the financial mess or the public embarrassment." Of course he did. David had always been weak, the kind of man who was attracted to Lorraine's glamour and social status, but had no interest in standing by her when things got difficult. "She needs a place to stay, just temporarily, while she figures out what to do next. I know it's a lot to ask, but she's family, and your studio apartment is small, but maybe she could sleep on the couch for a few weeks?" I almost laughed out loud. The woman who'd spent years mocking my adorable little shoebox now needed to sleep on my couch? "Mom, my apartment is barely big enough for me. There's no way." I know, it's not ideal. But Maya, she has nowhere else to go. She's too proud to ask herself, but she's desperate. Please, just think about it." I did think about it. All afternoon, I thought about it. Lorraine had made her feelings about my life perfectly clear. Small apartment, small job, small dreams. She'd never missed an opportunity to remind me that I was settling for less than I deserved, that I lacked ambition, that I was content to live a little life while she built something grand.
But now, she needed me. By evening, I'd made my decision. I called my mother back. Tell Aunt Lorraine she can stay with me for a few weeks while she gets back on her feet. Oh, Maya, thank you so much. She'll be so grateful. Grateful. That would be a first.
But as I hung up the phone, I was already thinking ahead. Ethan had been right. The universe did have a sense of humor, and I was about to help it along. I opened my laptop and pulled up the listing for the Meridian Street property, the 2-bedroom apartment I'd been holding vacant for the past month. Perfect location, reasonable rent, available immediately. Everything someone in Lorraine's position would need. I picked up my phone and called Ethan. Remember that property on Meridian Street? I think I found the perfect tenant. Oh yeah? Anyone I know? You could say that. And Ethan, I want to handle this lease personally. Every detail. I could hear the smile in his voice. This is going to be interesting. That, I said, already drafting the lease terms in my head, is exactly what I'm counting on. Lorraine arrived at my studio apartment with 3 Louis Vuitton suitcases and the air of someone doing me a tremendous favor. Maya, darling, I cannot tell you how much this means to me, she said, sweeping into my modest space like a hurricane in designer clothing. Just a few days, I promise, maybe a week at most. I have several promising leads on new apartments, and once David comes to his senses about this ridiculous divorce nonsense. She trailed off, taking in my apartment with barely concealed horror. 400 square feet of carefully chosen furniture, clean lines, and absolutely no wasted space. I designed it to be functional and efficient, every piece serving multiple purposes. To me, it was perfect. To Lorraine, it was clearly a humanitarian crisis. Well, she said after a long pause, it's certainly, cozy. I watched her struggle to find somewhere to put her suitcases that wouldn't block the main walkway. The apartment that had seemed spacious and comfortable when it was just me suddenly felt like a dollhouse with an oversized occupant. The couch pulls out into a bed, I offered, gesturing to my carefully chosen sleeper sofa. Fresh sheets are in the closet. Perfect! Just like camping! Her laugh was bright and brittle. This will be such an adventure, like we're college roommates again. Well, except I was in a sorority house, and you were in, what was it? The honor storm? She unpacked with the efficiency of someone accustomed to traveling, but also with the unconscious assumption that any space she occupied was automatically hers to reorganize. Within an hour, my bathroom counter was crowded with expensive skincare products, my kitchen table had become her temporary office, and my living room looked like a luxury boutique had exploded. I hope you don't mind, she said, not sounding like she cared whether I minded or not, but I'm expecting several important calls about job opportunities. The fashion industry moves so quickly, you know. Connections are everything. For the next 3 days, those important calls never seemed to stop. Lorraine's voice carried through my thin walls at all hours, sometimes pleading, sometimes angry, occasionally breaking into tears. She was calling everyone she had ever met, trying to cash in decades of social connections. But the conversations I overheard told a different story than the confident face she put on for me. Marcus, darling, about that position we discussed. I see. Yes, I understand the scandal makes things complicated. No, of course, I wouldn't want to put you in an awkward position. Jennifer, it's Lorraine. I was hoping we could grab lunch to discuss. Oh, yes, I saw the article too. No, I completely understand if now isn't the right time. David, please call me back. I know you're angry, but we can work this out. The prenum doesn't have to... David, please, I'm staying in Maya's studio apartment. Do you understand what that means? That last call, made at 2 a.m. while she thought I was sleeping, was the most honest I had ever heard her sound. Raw, desperate, scared. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. The 4th morning, I woke up to find her sitting at my kitchen table in yesterday's clothes, staring at her laptop screen with hollow eyes. Everything okay?
I asked, though the answer was obviously no. The apartment I was supposed to see today fell through. The landlord Googled me and saw the news articles. Apparently, being associated with financial fraud makes you a liability risk. She air quoted the words with bitter precision. Even for places I can actually afford, which is basically nowhere decent. She gestured to her laptop screen, which showed a list of rental properties that looked nothing like the luxury spaces she was accustomed to. There's a studio in the warehouse district for $800 a month, but the listing says cash only, first and last month plus deposit. That's $2,400 just to move in. And the photos? She shuddered. Maya, I never realized how expensive it is to be poor. The irony was thick. I could taste it. For years, she'd lectured me about living small, settling for less, lacking ambition. Now she was discovering that the life she'd dismissed as pathetic was actually a luxury she couldn't afford. What about moving somewhere else entirely? I suggested. Maybe another city, a fresh start. With what money? David froze our joint accounts pending the divorce proceedings. I have about $3,000 in my personal checking account and a credit card that's nearly maxed out. Plus, everywhere I go, the scandal follows. Google is forever, Maya. She slumped back in her chair, looking smaller than I had ever seen her. The confident socialite who'd commanded every room she entered was gone, replaced by someone genuinely lost. I keep thinking this is temporary, she continued quietly. That any minute now, I'll wake up and Jared will call to explain it was all a misunderstanding, or David will realize he's being ridiculous, or someone will offer me a position that pays enough to get back on my feet. But it's been 2 weeks, and every day things just get worse.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. For the first time since she'd arrived, Lorraine wasn't performing. She wasn't putting on a show or managing impressions. She was just tired, scared, and completely out of her depth. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. Actually, I said carefully, I might know of something. It's not luxury, I explained to Lorraine over coffee the next morning, but it's clean, safe, and available immediately. I'd called Ethan the night before to set everything in motion. The Meridian Street property was perfect for what I had in mind. A 2-bedroom apartment in a decent neighborhood, recently renovated, with a reasonable rent that would seem generous compared to the overpriced market rate places Lorraine had been looking at. The building is managed by a small company that focuses on long-term tenants rather than just maximizing profits, I continued, staying carefully vague about my ownership. They're willing to work with people who have complicated circumstances. Lorraine's eyes lit up with the first genuine hope I'd seen from her since she'd arrived. Really? They'd consider me, even with all the negative press? The property manager is a friend from college. I explained your situation, and he said he's more interested in reliable tenants than perfect credit reports. The rent is $1,500 a month, which is below market rate for the area. It was actually below market rate. I deliberately priced it low enough that Lorraine could afford it with whatever part-time work she might find, but high enough that every payment would feel significant to someone rebuilding from nothing. $1,500? Lorraine calculated quickly. I could manage that if I find even part-time work. Maya, this sounds perfect. When can I see it? This afternoon if you want. Ethan, that's the property manager, said he could meet us there at 2. 3 hours later, we stood outside the Meridian Street building while Lorraine tried to contain her excitement. The neighborhood was tree-lined and quiet, with a small park across the street and local coffee shops within walking distance. Not the luxury district she was used to, but respectable and safe. It's charming, she said, and for once I believed she meant it. Ethan was waiting in the lobby, professional and polite, but giving no indication that he knew about my connection to the property. He'd always been good at playing his role. Miss Kensington, I'm Ethan Park. Maya's told me about your situation, and I think this unit might be exactly what you're looking for. The apartment was on the 3rd floor, bright and airy with hardwood floors and updated fixtures, 2 real bedrooms, a full kitchen, and windows that actually opened to let in fresh air. After a week in my studio, it must have felt palatial to Lorraine.
The previous tenant took excellent care of the place, he explained as we walked through. All applications are included, heat and hot water are covered in the rent, and there's a laundry room in the basement. It's perfect, Lorraine breathed, running her hands along the kitchen counters. Absolutely perfect. When could I move in? That depends on the lease terms, said Ethan smoothly. Given your current situation, we'd need first month's rent plus a security deposit, and there are some specific clauses we'd want to include. What kind of clauses? Standard stuff mostly. No smoking, no pets, quiet hours from 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. The building has a good community feel, and we want to maintain that. Lorraine nodded eagerly. Of course, that all sounds completely reasonable. There's also a community service requirement, Ethan continued, consulting his tablet. All tenants are expected to contribute 4 hours per month to building maintenance or community projects. Things like helping elderly residents with groceries, organizing building social events, basic cleaning and common areas. Community service? Lorraine's enthusiasm dimmed slightly. Is that normal? For this building, yes. We find it builds stronger relationships between tenants and keeps operating costs down, which allows us to keep rents affordable. I watched Lorraine process this. The woman who'd once hired people to walk her dog was being asked to carry groceries for elderly neighbors. But she needed this apartment, and we all knew it. That sounds character building, she said finally. I'd be happy to participate. Excellent. There's one more thing. Ethan's voice was carefully neutral. Given the recent financial complications, we'd need all rent payments in cash or certified check. No personal checks or electronic transfers. This was my addition to the lease terms. I wanted Lorraine to feel the weight of every payment, to physically hand over the money each month instead of just clicking a button online. Cash payments aren't a problem, Lorraine said quickly. When can I sign the lease? I can have the paperwork read by tomorrow morning. Maya, thank you for the referral. It's always nice when we can help someone get back on their feet. As we walked back to my apartment, Lorraine was practically floating. Maya, I cannot thank you enough. This is exactly what I needed. A fresh start, a chance to rebuild, and it's so much nicer than anything else I looked at in my price range. She was right about that. I'd made sure of it. Lorraine moved into the Meridian Street apartment on a Tuesday morning with the same 3 suitcases she'd brought to my place, plus a few boxes of personal items that David had grudgingly allowed her to take from the penthouse. I helped her carry everything upstairs, and for the first time since her world had collapsed, she seemed genuinely happy. Look at this light, she exclaimed, throwing open the living room windows. And having a real bedroom again, I've forgotten how much I missed privacy.
She wandered through the space like she was rediscovering the concept of home, touching surfaces and rearranging the minimal furniture that came with the unit. It's going to be perfect here, she said. I can already feel it. This is where I'm going to rebuild my life. Within an hour of moving in, Lorraine met Mrs. Wilkins. Mrs. Wilkins was 73 years old, lived alone in 2B with her ancient tabby cat, and had been a tenant in the building for over 20 years. She was also the unofficial building manager for tenant relations, the person who knew everyone's business and wasn't shy about sharing her opinions. You must be the new girl in 3A, Mrs. Wilkins said, when she encountered Lorraine in the hallway. Heard you had some trouble recently. Money problems, was it? I watched from the stairwell as Lorraine struggled with how to respond. In her old life, she would have been horrified by such a direct question from a stranger, but she needed these people to accept her. Some business setbacks, Lorraine said carefully, but I'm looking forward to a fresh start here. Well, that's good, dear. We're a friendly building, but we look out for each other. I hope you're planning to participate in the community spirit around here. Of course, I'm very excited about the community service requirement. Mrs. Wilkins smiled approvingly. Good to hear. We've got a building meeting next Monday to plan our monthly potluck dinner. Hope you'll join us. A potluck dinner. I almost laughed imagining Lorraine's internal reaction. The woman who'd once hired caterers for casual dinner parties was now being invited to bring a covered dish to the community room. But she smiled brightly and said, I wouldn't miss it. Over the next few days, I found excuses to stop by and check on Lorraine's adjustment. Officially, I was just being a good niece. Unofficially, I was monitoring the success of my plan. "Maya, everyone's so friendly," Lorraine told me during one visit, though her smile seemed a little forced. "Mrs. Wilkins introduced me to half the building already. Did you know there's a retired postal worker who grows vegetables on the roof? And a young mother who runs a daycare out of her apartment?" These were not the kind of neighbors Lorraine had ever associated with before. Her old social circle consisted of other boutique owners, wealthy divorcees, and people who summered in the Hamptons. Now she was learning about people who clipped coupons and bought generic groceries. That sounds nice, very down to earth. Yes, exactly. Very authentic. She paused, choosing her words carefully. It's taking some adjustment, but I think it's good for me. Humbling, you know? Humbling. That was exactly what I'd been hoping for. The next week, Lorraine started her community service hours. Mrs. Wilkins had assigned her to help with grocery shopping for the elderly tenants who had trouble getting around. "It's actually quite rewarding," Lorraine told me after her first day, though she looked exhausted. Mrs. Chen in 1C hadn't been to a real grocery store in months because the bus system is so confusing for her. We spent 2 hours at the market, and she taught me how to pick the best vegetables. This from a woman who used to have her groceries delivered by personal shoppers. And Mr. Rodriguez in 4B has been trying to fix his leaky faucet for weeks because he can't afford a plumber. I'm going to see if I can figure out how to help him with that. Lorraine was learning skills she'd never needed before, solving problems she'd never had to think about. For the first time in her privileged life, she was discovering what it meant to be genuinely useful to other people. But the most telling moment came during the building's potluck dinner. I arrived as Lorraine's guest, carrying a store-bought dessert, while she proudly presented a casserole she'd made from scratch, the first meal she'd cooked in years. "It's tuna noodle casserole," she explained to Mrs. Wilkins, who was organizing the buffet table. "I found the recipe online. I hope it turned out okay." "I'm sure it's lovely, dear. Cooking for others is one of life's great pleasures." I watched Lorraine glow under the simple praise, more genuinely pleased than I'd ever seen her at any fancy charity gala or society event. As the evening progressed, I observed her navigating conversations about budgeting tips, discount shopping strategies, and home repair tutorials. Topics that would have bored her to tears 6 months ago now held her complete attention. "Maya," she said as we were leaving, "I know this probably sounds strange, but I think this might be the happiest I've been in years. There's something so real about all this. These people genuinely care about each other, not because of what they can get from each other, but just because they're neighbors." Real. After a lifetime of carefully curated artificiality, Lorraine was finally discovering authenticity. And the beautiful irony was that she was finding it in exactly the kind of small, humble life she'd once dismissed as pathetic. As I walked back to my studio apartment that night, I allowed myself a small smile of satisfaction. The plan was working perfectly. Lorraine was learning humility, gratitude, and genuine human connection. She was becoming a better person. She just had no idea that her generous, understanding landlord was the same niece she'd spent years patronizing. And if everything went according to plan, she never would. 6 weeks into her new life, Lorraine was learning that reinventing yourself at 52 was considerably harder than she had anticipated. I found her at the small cafe down the street from her apartment, laptop open, surrounded by empty coffee cups, and the kind of desperate energy that comes from hours of fruitless job searching. "Maya!" she called out when she spotted me, waving me over with forced enthusiasm. "Perfect timing! I was just taking a break from applications." The laptop screen showed Indeed.com, with dozens of tabs open for positions ranging from retail associate to administrative assistant.
a far cry from the executive-level fashion industry roles she'd been searching for initially. "How's the job hunt going?" "Well," she said, the word carrying more weight than usual, "it's been educational. Apparently, 20 years of running your own boutique doesn't translate as easily to other industries as I'd hoped." She pulled up a rejection email, one of many in her inbox. "This one's from a department store management position. While your experience is impressive, we're looking for candidates with recent corporate retail experience." Recent corporate experience. Maya, I built a successful business from nothing. But because I was an entrepreneur instead of climbing someone else's corporate ladder, that somehow counts against me. There was a bitterness in her voice I'd never heard before, but also something else, a dawning understanding of how the world actually worked for most people. "Have you considered starting smaller? Maybe part-time retail while you look for something bigger?" Smaller. She laughed, but not with humor. "Do you know what retail sales associates make per hour? $9.50 at most places. Even working full-time, that's barely enough to cover rent, let alone food and everything else." The mathematics of survival, something she'd never had to calculate before, were clearly shocking to her. "But you know what the really crazy part is?" she continued, leaning forward conspiratorially. "I applied for a position at Nordstrom, thinking my fashion background would be perfect. The manager was this young woman, maybe 30, and she kept asking about my customer service philosophy and my experience with POS systems. POS systems, Maya. I owned a boutique for 15 years, but I never actually ran the register myself." I watched her process this revelation that owning a business and actually doing the day-to-day work of that business were entirely different skill sets. So I've been adapting my approach. Mrs. Wilkins suggested I look into positions that value life experience over technical skills. Yesterday, I had an interview at a senior center for an activities coordinator position. How did that go? Actually, really well. The pay is terrible, $12 an hour, but the work sounds meaningful, and they were impressed that I organized charity events for years, even if those were fancy galas instead of bingo nights. $12 an hour. I did the quick math, less than $2,000 a month before taxes. After rent, utilities, and basic necessities, she'd have almost nothing left over. No designer clothes, no expensive dinners, no luxury anything. "The woman who interviewed me said something interesting," Lorraine continued. "She said that people who've never struggled sometimes have trouble connecting with seniors who are dealing with financial stress, health issues, loneliness. But people who've experienced real loss, real uncertainty, they have empathy that can't be taught." Real loss, real uncertainty. 6 months ago, these concepts weren't Lorraine could have defined from personal experience. "She offered me the position," Lorraine said quietly. 25 hours a week to start, with the possibility of full-time if funding comes through. It's not what I pictured when I thought about rebuilding my career, but yesterday when I was helping Mrs. Chen organize her medications, she told me I was the first person in years who'd taken the time to really listen to her stories about her late husband. And Mr. Rodriguez actually cried when I helped him set up his new television. Apparently, his grandson had been too busy to visit and help him for months. She paused, stirring her cold coffee absently. There's something to be said for work that matters to people, you know? Even if it doesn't pay well. This was not the Aunt Lorraine I'd grown up watching. That woman had measured success exclusively in dollars and status symbols. This version was discovering that there were other ways to find meaning and value. "I start Monday. And Maya, thank you for everything. The apartment, the support, just believing I could figure this out. I know it hasn't been easy having me fall apart all over your life." For the first time since this whole plan had started, I felt a genuine pang of guilt. She was thanking me for my kindness while sitting in a cafe she could barely afford, about to start a job that would pay her less in a month than she used to spend on shoes. But she also seemed lighter somehow, more present.
more real than I'd ever seen her. "You don't need to thank me," I said. "Family helps family." "Yes, but you didn't have to, especially after I was such a snob about your choices for so many years. I keep thinking about that dinner at Chez Laurent, the things I said about your apartment, your life. I was such an ass, Maya." She was, but hearing her acknowledge it felt strangely hollow. The satisfaction I'd expected to feel at this moment of recognition wasn't there. Instead, I just felt tired. "People say things," I said, vaguely. "No, it was more than that. I was condescending and dismissive, and I acted like my way of living was the only valid way. But look at me now. Unemployed, divorced, living in a 2-bedroom apartment, and grateful for it, while you've got your life completely together. Steady job, financial security, genuine friends. You were right all along about what really matters." If only she knew how right I'd been. 3 months into her new life, Lorraine had become the unofficial social coordinator for the Meridian Street building. It started with the monthly potluck dinners, which she'd volunteered to organize after Mrs. Wilkins mentioned that participation had been declining. Within weeks, she'd transformed them from dutiful gatherings into genuine celebrations that even the most reclusive tenants looked forward to. "The secret," she explained to me as we set up tables in the community room, "is understanding what people actually need, not what you think they should want." She gestured to the buffet table, which showcased dishes from 6 different cultures alongside traditional American comfort foods. Mrs. Martinez makes incredible tamales, but she was always embarrassed to bring them because she thought people expected more mainstream food. And Mr. Park from 4A is an amazing artist, but he never talked about it because he thought nobody would be interested. Now he's teaching painting classes for the kids in the building. I watched her move through the room, checking on elderly tenants, organizing activities for children, mediating minor disputes between neighbors. She'd developed an intuitive understanding of the building's social dynamics that would have been impossible in her old life, where relationships were transactional and surface level. "Lorraine's been such a gift to this community," Mrs. Wilkins told me as we watched her help a new tenant feel welcome. "Some people come into a building and just exist here. Others become part of the family. Your aunt is definitely family now." Family. The word carried weight in this context that it never had in our actual family gatherings. I said she mentioned she got a promotion at work. "Oh yes, full time now. 32 hours a week plus benefits. She's so proud of those benefits. Talks about her health insurance like it's a luxury vacation package." Mrs. Wilkins chuckled. "It's sweet, really. Most people her age take things like dental coverage for granted. Most people her age who hadn't spent their lives assuming someone else would always handle the practical details. The residents at the senior center adore her. She started a fashion show program where she helps them put together outfits from donated clothing. Gives them a chance to feel glamorous again, you know? She has an eye for making people feel beautiful, even on a tight budget." Making people feel beautiful on a tight budget? 6 months ago, Lorraine's solution to feeling beautiful involved $1,000 shopping trips and professional styling services. "But the best thing," she said, lowering her voice conspiratorially, "is how she's been helping Zara." Zara was the young mother in 2D who ran an unlicensed daycare out of her apartment to make ends meet. Single mom, 2 kids of her own, barely scraping by despite working constantly. Helping how? Well, Zara's been trying to get her GED for years, but she can't afford childcare while she takes classes. So Lorraine started watching the kids 2 evenings a week for free. Says it's good practice for her work with seniors, but we all know she's just being kind. I felt something twist in my chest.
The woman who'd once hired nannies to walk her dog was now providing free childcare so a struggling single mom could get her high school diploma. And she's been tutoring Zara in math, she added. Turns out all those years managing boutique finances gave her quite a head for numbers. Zara's test scores have improved dramatically.
As if summoned by our conversation, Zara appeared at my elbow, holding her 4-year-old daughter's hand. "You're Maya, right? Lorraine's niece?" When I nodded, she continued, "I just wanted you to know how incredible your aunt is. I don't know what I would have done without her help these past months." "She's been wonderful with Zofia," Zara continued, gesturing to her daughter, who was shyly peeking around her mother's legs. "Zofia's been having trouble in pre-K because she's behind on reading, and Lorraine's been working with her every Tuesday night, for free. She says every child deserves to feel confident about learning." Every child deserves to feel confident about learning. This from a woman who'd once complained that other people's children at restaurants were disruptive to the dining experience. "She's taking her GED test next month," Zara said, beaming. "First person in my family who have graduated high school. Lorraine says once I pass, she'll help me research community college programs." After Zara moved on, I found myself staring at Lorraine across the room. She was sitting with 3 elderly residents, looking at photos on someone's phone and laughing at what was clearly a well-worn family story. She looked content, not performing contentment for an audience, not trying to convince anyone of anything, just genuinely at peace in this moment, with these people in this life that 6 months ago she would have considered a catastrophic failure. "Your aunt's become quite the fixture around here," Mrs. Wilkins said, following my gaze. "Hard to imagine what this place was like before she arrived." But I could imagine it. I could remember exactly what it had been like. A perfectly functional building where people lived quietly and kept to themselves. Lorraine had transformed it into something warmer, more connected. She'd built the kind of community that money couldn't buy, using skills she'd never known she possessed. She's found her place. Indeed she has. And between you and me, Mrs. Wilkins lowered her voice again. I think she's happier here than she ever was in that fancy penthouse. Some people need to lose everything to find out who they really are. Some people need to lose everything to find out who they really are. The words stayed with me as I walked home that night. I'd set out to humble Lorraine, to teach her a lesson about judging others. But watching her tonight, seeing the genuine joy in her face as she connected with her neighbors, I realized something I hadn't anticipated. She wasn't being humbled. She was being liberated. The crack in my carefully constructed plan began with a simple maintenance request. Ethan called me on a Thursday morning, his voice carrying the kind of careful professionalism he used when he had complicated news to deliver. "We have a situation with the heating system in the Meridian building. The boiler has been making concerning noises, and the HVAC contractor says it needs to be replaced soon. Like, within the next few months soon." I rubbed my temples, already calculating costs. How much are we talking? $15,000 for a new system installed. Maybe $12,000 if we go with a refurbished unit. And if we don't replace it, well, it's not going to fail catastrophically, but it's going to get less and less efficient. Higher utility costs, inconsistent heating, probably some units getting much less heat than others. The contractor says the 3rd and 4th floors would be affected first. The 3rd floor, where Lorraine lived. How long do we have? Hard to say. Could be this winter, could be next. But Maya, Ethan paused, and I could hear the question he wasn't asking. This is going to require raising rents. There's no way around it. Even if we amortize the cost over 5 years, we're looking at a $100 monthly increase per unit to cover it. $100! For most of my tenants, that was manageable, but for Lorraine, scraping by on her part-time salary, it could be the difference between staying and having to move again. What if we just absorbed the cost? Maya, you know I never question your financial decisions, but that's $15,000 for a building that's already priced below market rate. You're not exactly maximizing profit here. He was right, of course. The Meridian building was my least profitable property, deliberately kept affordable for exactly the kind of tenants who lived there now. Adding a major unexpected expense would turn it from a modest income producer into an actual loss.
There's something else, Ethan continued. Mrs. Wilkins called me yesterday about the rent increase rumors. Apparently, word's gotten around that something's happening with the heating system, and people are worried. What kind of worried? The kind where they're looking at other apartments just in case. Maya, if we raise rents and lose half our tenants, we'll be worse off than if we just eat the repair cost. I stared out my studio apartment window, watching morning commuters hurry past on the sidewalk below. 6 months ago, this would have been a simple business decision. Raise rents, replace tenants who couldn't afford the increase, maintain profitability. But now I knew these people. Mrs. Chen, who'd been in the building for 15 years and survived on a fixed income that barely covered her expenses. Mr. Rodriguez, whose Social Security check was exactly $43 more than his rent. The young family in 1A, who'd chosen the building specifically because they could afford it, while saving for their children's college funds. And Lorraine, who'd finally found a place where she belonged, who was rebuilding her life one small victory at a time. Give me a few days to think about it, I told Ethan. Don't say anything to the tenants yet. But 3 days later, the decision was taken out of my hands. I was having my usual Tuesday dinner with Lorraine at the small Italian place near her apartment, a ritual we'd developed over the past month, when she brought up the heating situation. Maya, I need to ask you something, and I hope you won't think I'm being presumptuous. What's going on? There are rumors that our building might have to raise rents because of some expensive repairs. Mrs. Wilkins heard it from someone who heard it from the property manager. My carefully constructed anonymity was starting to crumble. And? I asked, carefully. Well, I've been doing some research into tenant rights, and I discovered something interesting about our building's ownership structure. My stomach dropped. It's owned by something called Meridian Properties, LLC, which wouldn't mean anything to me, except that I've been helping Mr. Rodriguez with his computer skills, and he showed me how to look up business registrations online. She pulled out her phone and showed me a screen I recognized, the State Business Registry website. Meridian Properties, LLC, was registered 3 years ago, and the listed agent for service of process is someone named Methan Park. I kept my face carefully neutral, but my heart was racing. Methan Park, who happens to be your college friend, the same Methan Park who's the property manager for my building. She set down her phone and looked at me directly for the first time in the conversation. Maya, I may have been a privileged snob for most of my life, but I'm not stupid. You own my building, don't you? The question hung in the air between us like a sword waiting to fall. For 6 months, I'd been orchestrating this elaborate lesson in humility, watching Lorraine transform from entitled socialite to genuine human being, all while secretly controlling every aspect of her housing situation. Now, looking into her eyes across a table at a modest Italian restaurant where she'd learned to appreciate $15 pasta dishes, I realized that the moment of truth I'd been avoiding was finally here. And I had absolutely no idea what I was going to say. The silence stretched between us for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Lorraine's eyes searched my face, looking for confirmation of what she'd already figured out. I could see the exact moment when my expression gave me away. "You do," she said quietly. "You own my building."
I set down my wine glass carefully, buying myself a few more seconds to think. 6 months of careful planning, and I'd been undone by her newfound curiosity and Mr. Rodriguez's computer lessons. "Yes," I said finally. "I do." "How long have you known?" "About my situation. I mean about Jared, the boutique, everything." "I saw the first news article the day it came out." "And you decided to, what, rescue me? Set me up in one of your properties as some kind of charity case?" There was hurt in her voice, but also something else, a sharpness that reminded me of the old Lorraine, the one who could cut someone down with a perfectly placed observation. It wasn't charity. Then what was it? I looked around the small restaurant where we'd been having these weekly dinners, at the other diners who were clearly locals, people who came here not because it was trendy, but because it was affordable and the food was good. People like the person Lorraine had become. Do you remember what you said at dinner that night at Chez Laurent? Maya, I said a lot of things that night. I was showing off, being awful. You said I was thinking too small, that I needed to dream bigger, that I couldn't live small and expect big things to happen to me. Lorraine's face went pale. Oh, God. This was about that dinner, about what I said about your apartment. Partly. Her voice was getting louder, drawing glances from other tables. Maya, what exactly was this? Some elaborate revenge scheme because I was rude about your living situation? Keep your voice down. Don't tell me to keep my voice down. I'm sitting here having dinner with someone who's been lying to me for 6 months, who set up my entire life as some kind of, experiment? Punishment? She was attracting attention now, but she didn't seem to care. The composure she'd developed over the past months was cracking, revealing the raw anger underneath. It wasn't punishment, and if you'll listen for a minute instead of making a scene— A scene? Maya, you secretly bought the building I live in and manipulated me into moving there. You've been watching me struggle, watching me work for $12 an hour, watching me learn to live on food stamps and thrift store clothes, all while knowing you could have helped me at any time. And you want me not to make a scene? You didn't need help. You needed to learn— What? That poor people aren't as worthless as I thought they were? That there's dignity in honest work? That community matters more than status symbols? She laughed bitterly. Mission accomplished, Maya. I learned all of that. But apparently what I didn't learn was that my own niece was capable of this level of deception. The couple at the next table was openly staring now. I reached for my wallet, but Lorraine caught my wrist. No, we're not done. I want to understand this. You own how many properties? I hesitated, but what was the point of lying now? 12. 12. And you live in a studio apartment? Because I don't need more space. Because minimalism suits me. Because every dollar I don't spend on unnecessary luxury is a dollar I can invest in something that generates income. And you've been doing this for how long? Building the portfolio? About 8 years. 8 years. So when you were lecturing me about thinking bigger, about building wealth, about real estate investment, you were already doing all of that, more successfully than I ever did. Yes. And you let me. You sat there and let me patronize you about financial planning and property ownership when you had more real estate than I ever owned. I did.
Why? It was such a simple question, but the answer was complicated. Why had I sat through those dinners, those lectures, those casual put-downs about my small life and small dreams? Why had I let her make me feel lesser when I knew I wasn't? Because I wanted to see what you'd do with it, I said finally. The lecture, the advice, the assumption that you knew better than I did about everything, I wanted to see if you'd actually meant any of it or if it was just performance. And you meant it. You genuinely believed that the way you lived was better, more meaningful, more successful than the way I lived. You believed that size and status and visible wealth were the only measures that mattered. Lorraine stared at me for a long moment. And now? Now you know better. So this was all a lesson about humility, about judging people. It was a lesson about a lot of things, such as I chose my words carefully, about what really matters, about the difference between having money and flaunting money, about the value of work that serves others instead of just serving yourself, about what it means to be genuinely useful to the people around you. And you thought you had the right to teach me these things? I thought you needed to learn them. By manipulation, by deception, by controlling my entire living situation without my knowledge. By giving you the opportunity to discover who you really are when everything else is stripped away. Lorraine was quiet for a long time, turning her wine glass in slow circles on the table. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but steady.
"You're right," she said. "About most of it. I was a snob. I was shallow. I judged people based on their possessions and their status instead of their character. I needed to learn those lessons." I felt a moment of relief, thinking she understood. "But, Maya," she continued, "the way you taught them was wrong and cruel." The relief evaporated. "You had the power to help me from the beginning. You could have offered me a loan, or a job, or just honesty. Instead, you chose to watch me suffer, to watch me panic about rent payments and agonize over whether I could afford groceries. You turned my crisis into your entertainment." "That's not what isn't it? You said you wanted to see what I'd do with it. You wanted to watch me learn humility. You set up the perfect controlled environment where you could observe my transformation like I was some kind of lab rat." Her words hit harder than I had expected because there was truth in them. I had been watching. I had been observing her struggles with a kind of clinical fascination, measuring her progress against my expectations. "The person I've become over these past months, the relationships I've built, the work I'm doing, the happiness I found, none of that is real, is it? Because it's all been orchestrated by you." "The relationships are real. The work is real. The person you've become is real. But the circumstances that created all of it were fake. My entire life for the past 6 months has been an elaborate performance that I didn't know I was giving." I wanted to argue with her, to explain that the circumstances might have been orchestrated, but her responses to them had been genuine, that the kindness she'd shown to her neighbors, the dedication she'd brought to her work, the growth she'd experienced, none of that had been fake. But sitting across from her in that small restaurant, seeing the hurt and betrayal in her eyes, I realized something I hadn't anticipated. She was right about the cruelty.
Doing okay. Not thriving, not grateful for the lessons learned, just okay. It felt like the smallest possible acknowledgement of my existence, and probably more than I deserved. I picked up my phone and started typing a response, then deleted it, started again, deleted again. What do you say to someone whose life you've secretly controlled for months, even if it was for their own good? How do you apologize for being right in all the wrong ways? Finally, I settled on something simple. "I'm glad. And I'm sorry." The response came an hour later. "I know you are. Maybe someday that will be enough." Maybe someday. It wasn't forgiveness, but it wasn't complete rejection either. It was the possibility of something better earned through time and patience, rather than manipulation and control. I set my phone aside and looked around my studio apartment, my perfectly functional, carefully chosen, genuinely modest space. For 8 years, I'd lived here quietly, building wealth without showing it, succeeding without needing recognition. It had been a kind of power being underestimated. But power without trust, I was learning, was just another form of loneliness. Outside my window, the city hummed with the lives of millions of people, each carrying their own stories of success and failure, growth and stagnation, kindness and cruelty. Somewhere out there, Lorraine was probably getting ready for bed in her new apartment, maybe calling Mrs. Wilkins to check on the building gossip, maybe preparing activities for tomorrow's residents at the senior center. Living her life, the real one, built on genuine choices and honest relationships, without my invisible hand guiding every step. It was what I'd wanted for her all along. I just hadn't expected it to feel so much like losing.
I had had the power to help her from the beginning. I could have offered her a loan to get back on her feet, or a job in one of my property management companies, or simply the truth about my financial situation. Instead, I'd chosen the path that would be most satisfying to my ego, the one where I got to be right about everything while watching her be wrong. "You want to know the really awful part?" Lorraine said, her voice barely above a whisper. I was grateful. For months, I've been thanking you for your kindness, for believing in me, for helping me when no one else would. I thought you were the one person in my family who truly cared about me. I do care about you. No, Maya. You care about being right. You care about proving your point. If you'd actually cared about me, you would have helped me instead of using my pain as a teaching tool." She stood up, pulling her purse from the back of her chair. "Where are you going?" "Home. To my apartment. Which, apparently, I need to start looking for alternatives to, since I can't trust that my housing situation is actually stable." "Lorraine, wait. No, I need time to think about this, about what it means, about what I want to do next, and I need to do that without you watching and taking notes." She walked toward the door, then turned back. "For what it's worth, Maya, you were right about the lessons I needed to learn. I was shallow and judgmental, and I treated people badly based on assumptions about their worth. But you know what? You're guilty of the same thing. You assumed I was incapable of growth, incapable of change, incapable of learning those lessons any way except through suffering. You never gave me the chance to surprise you." The door chimed as she left, and I sat alone at our table, staring at her half-finished plate of pasta. 3 weeks later, I stood in my studio apartment, looking out at the city lights and thinking about consequences. Lorraine had moved out of the Meridian Street building. Not immediately. She'd given proper notice, paid her final month's rent in cash as required by the lease, and even helped organize one last potluck dinner for the neighbors who'd become her friends. But she'd found a new place, a small one-bedroom across town that she could afford on her salary from the senior center. Mrs. Wilkins had called to tell me about the farewell party the building had thrown for her. She didn't say much about why she was leaving, just that it was time for a change. But Maya, that girl was crying when she said goodbye to everyone. This place meant something to her. I'd replaced the heating system anyway, absorbing the full cost without raising anyone's rent. It seemed like the least I could do. Ethan had been surprisingly unsympathetic when I'd told him what happened. "So let me get this straight. You orchestrated this elaborate plan to teach your aunt a lesson about humility. It worked better than you could have hoped. She actually became a better person, and now you're upset because she called you out for being manipulative?" "I'm not upset. Ethan, you've been miserable for 3 weeks. You got exactly what you wanted. Lorraine learned humility, discovered the value of genuine relationships, found meaningful work, and became a contributing member of her community. Mission accomplished. So why do you look like someone stole your dog?" "Because she was right about the cruelty," I wanted to say. "Because I had the power to help her and chose not to. Because I turned her crisis into my victory." But what I said was, "Because she doesn't trust me anymore." Well, yeah. You lied to her for 6 months and manipulated her entire living situation. Trust is probably going to be an issue. So what do I do now? You could start with an apology, a real one, not an explanation of why you were justified. Now, 3 weeks later, I was still thinking about that conversation and about the text message I'd received from Lorraine that morning. Got promoted to full-time activities director. Benefits and everything. Thought you'd want to know I'm doing okay.